On their honeymoon at an exclusive coastal retreat, a wealthy heir and his new bride were welcomed, not with chilled champagne, but with his ex, now the owner of the entire resort. As cameras flashed and frozen bank accounts spoke louder than vows, what he thought was paradise unraveled into the most humiliating spectacle of his life. The salty breeze brushed the smooth tarmac just beyond the edge of the secluded airstrip, where the hum of the sleek white jet's engine still lingered as they cooled. Julian Whittaker stepped down from the plane. First, his designer shades already in place, shielding his eyes from the golden Hawaiian sun that poured itself over the lush coastline like a silent promise. At his side, Camila stepped down gracefully, heels far too high for the runway, and a cream silk dress that hugged her like raw ambition. Her manicured fingers clutched Julian's arm, her radiant smile brimming with the certainty of someone who believed she had finally made it. The air was dense but sweet, laced with sea salt and the faint perfume of plumeria. A polished black SUV waited at the bottom of the stairs, idling smoothly. The driver hurried out and opened the back door at once, nodding deferentially. Julian didn't bother to acknowledge him, adjusting his platinum watch before sliding into the back seat without a word. Camila slipped in beside him, legs crossed before the door even clicked shut. "Welcome to paradise, Mrs. Whittaker," Julian murmured with a crooked grin, tucking a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. Camila giggled, brushing her lips against his jaw. "I could get used to this," she said, already flicking through her phone. "Did they even know we're showing up early?" Julian let out a short laugh. "Obviously. I arranged every detail. Top-floor oceanfront suite, private pool, champagne on ice. This place bends over backward for people like me." Camila's eyes shone as they wound through narrow roads flanked by palms, the resort revealing itself at last like a dream. Rows of whitewashed villas spilling down a cliffside, wrapped in lush gardens and endless pools that seemed to merge with the Pacific. As they stepped into the lobby, cool air wrapped around them like an invitation to luxury. Polished marble gleamed under cut-glass chandeliers. A line of staff in crisp uniforms stood motionless behind the desk, not one daring to meet the couple's gaze directly. Julian moved with the ease of a man born to be envied, born to be obeyed. Camila, draped in designer sunglasses and glittering diamond studs, floated behind him, the perfect portrait of a trophy wife in paradise. He was savoring his choice. Young, stunning, pliant, and adoring, everything his ex-wife had stopped being years ago. "Whittaker, Julian Whittaker, presidential suite," he said to the concierge, tapping the marble counter once, his impatience barely contained. The concierge hesitated. "1 moment, please, sir." Julian arched an eyebrow. "It's already paid in full. I booked it myself. We're here on our honeymoon." "Yes, of course, sir. I just need to confirm the details with our general manager. If you'd like to have a seat in the lounge, we'll handle it immediately." The tension was subtle but sparked under Julian's skin like static. He hated delays. He despised being made to wait. A small hot knot of anger bloomed behind his ribs. How dare they reduce him to any other man standing in line? He was Julian Whittaker. In his world, doors opened before he even asked. Camila, oblivious, didn't notice a thing. She posed for selfies in front of the swaying palms, adding captions like #wifey and blessed. Julian sat rigid in one of the plush lobby chairs, jaw clenched as the concierge murmured into a phone behind the front desk. No one offered them champagne. No one hurried over with apologies. Each minute crawled by, feeding the uneasy thought that maybe he wasn't as untouchable here as he was used to. After 10 minutes, Julian shot to his feet. "Is there an issue?" The concierge stood straighter. "Our general manager is on her way, sir. She'll assist you personally." "Fantastic," Julian muttered under his breath, pacing the polished floor. "Let's see how long she keeps this job." Then, from behind a frosted glass door, the sharp click of confident heels echoed through the lobby. Julian turned toward the sound and froze. The woman approaching wore a fitted navy dress, her dark hair swept into a sleek low bun. Every step was controlled, precise, powerful. She moved like she owned every inch of marble beneath her. "Isabella," he breathed, momentarily wondering if he'd lost his mind. His ex-wife stood before him, calm, composed, clipboard in hand. Her presence radiated such quiet command that for a split second, Julian forgot how to breathe. "Julian," she said smoothly, her voice as polite as if she'd run into him at a country club bar. "I didn't expect to see you so soon. Welcome to Kaya Cove." Camila glanced up from her phone, confusion flickering. "Who is she?" Julian's throat tightened, but he forced his tone steady. "This is Isabella, my ex-wife." Isabella gave Camila a single cordial nod. "And you must be the new Mrs. Whitaker." Her eyes drifted briefly to the diamond on Camila's finger, then back to her face, dissecting her with a polite curiosity that felt more like an audit. "Congratulations." Camila, unsure if it was a compliment or a veiled dig, forced a thin smile. "Thanks." Julian cleared his throat, straightening his shoulders. "What exactly is happening here? You work here now?" "I don't work here," Isabella said calmly, eyes locked on him. "Julian, I own it," Isabella said, her tone steady but unyielding. "I bought this resort 6 months ago. Smart investment, really." He stared at her, stunned. "You bought this place?" She flipped her clipboard around so he could see the letterhead, her name in bold serif type, Isabella Whitaker, Managing Director. A stamp of finality, a signature of absolute control. Camila blinked. "Wait, she owns the resort? Like, really owns it?" Isabella's polite smile didn't falter. "That's right. Now about your reservation, there's a slight issue we need to discuss privately." Julian's eyes darkened. "We have a suite booked, confirmed, and paid for." "Yes," Isabella agreed evenly, turning a page in the folder she held. "But our system flagged the transaction as potentially fraudulent." Camila gasped. "What? That's insane!" Isabella looked straight at Julian, unflinching. "Our accounting department cross-checked the payment source. The wire transfer came from an account that, according to the last legal filing, was still a joint marital asset. Since our divorce wasn't finalized until after you booked and the funds hadn't been divided yet, we have a problem." Julian's face turned red. "You're reaching." "I'm enforcing legal boundaries," Isabella said smoothly. "You see, Julian, when you withdrew money from our shared investment account to pay for a luxury honeymoon without disclosing it during the asset split, that's concealment, possibly fraud." "You wouldn't." "I already did." Camila stepped back a little, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is this true?" Julian didn't answer. Isabella handed him a folder. Inside, printed statements, highlighted wire transfers, a copy of their divorce agreement, and emails backing every word she'd said. "Until this is resolved," Isabella continued calmly, "your reservation is canceled. Your account access is frozen by court order." "You can't do this," Julian growled. "Oh, but I can," Isabella said, her voice like ice. "And I have." Camila's face twisted in disbelief. "So we're just homeless on our honeymoon?" Isabella turned to the front desk staff without another glance at Julian. "Please escort Mr. Whitaker and his guest to a private car. They'll be leaving shortly." As Julian opened his mouth to protest, a burst of flashbulbs erupted through the massive lobby windows. Photographers, reporters, microphones pressed against the glass. Someone had tipped them off. Julian turned in slow, mounting horror as Isabella slipped away through the same door she'd come from, leaving behind the chaos she had orchestrated with surgical precision. Camila clutched her bag, her voice shaking. "You told me this was all yours. You said we were set." Julian had no answer. The reporters were already pouring through the lobby doors, and the heat outside was nothing compared to the wildfire raging inside him now. He'd come here to celebrate a fresh start, but he hadn't realized this chapter was being ghostwritten by someone else entirely. The car ride away from Kaya Cove was suffocating in its silence, heavy with sticky air and the weight of everything unsaid. Julian's fingers drummed restlessly on the armrest as the vehicle wound down the palm-lined road, away from the cliffside paradise he had so confidently reserved just days ago. Beside him, Camila sat rigid, arms folded tight across her chest, her oversized sunglasses shielding her eyes. But Julian didn't need to see her face to read her mind. Each shallow exhale was like a ticking fuse to an explosion he knew was coming. For now, though, she stayed silent. They weren't taken to another 5-star suite or a private villa. Instead, the concierge had arranged a small guest house on the edge of town. Beige walls, a rickety ceiling fan spinning with a lazy squeak, and certainly no champagne chilling on ice. He hadn't believed the concierge for a second. Isabella's fingerprints were all over it, every detail perfectly executed. It made his skin crawl, the way she was still pulling invisible strings even as he sat half a mile away. stripped of every luxury he'd used to keep her in check. The moment they stepped inside, Julian slammed the bedroom door so hard the hinges rattled. Camila drifted through the cramped space like a restless cat in a stranger's cage. "Are you going to explain what the hell that was?" she asked finally, her voice low, tight with anger. Julian didn't turn around. He stood at the window, staring at a cracked parking lot. "It's nothing. She's bitter. She wants an audience." Camila let out a sharp, mocking laugh, tossing her designer bag onto the lumpy couch. "She didn't look bitter, Julian. She looked like a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. She hasn't lost anything." "She hasn't won anything either," he snapped, whipping around to face her. "This resort power trip? It's just a show. She won't keep it." "I know Isabella. She's no CEO." Camila cocked an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" "Because from where I was standing, she had the staff wrapped around her finger, the legal papers lined up, the press camped outside like she called them herself. She had you cornered. And she didn't even break a sweat." Julian yanked off his suit jacket and flung it across the bed, saying nothing. The room fell into an uncomfortable quiet, buzzing with tension. Inside, the word cornered festered like a wound, because she was right. And he hated her more in that moment for seeing the truth he refused to name. Camila sank onto the edge of the couch and pulled out her phone. A few minutes later, a humorless laugh escaped her lips. "What?" Julian demanded. "She's trending," Camila said flatly. "Your ex-wife, Isabella, returns, and there's a clip going viral of her telling the lobby that your reservation was canceled on ethical grounds." She turned the phone around so he could see the freeze frame of Isabella, cool and poised, as if she'd rehearsed it all her life. On Isabella's calm face, her jaw set firm, the caption beneath the viral clip read, "No woman should have to watch her life fund another's honeymoon." Julian stared at it, unblinking, a storm swirling dark and deep behind his eyes. "She called the press," he said slowly, piecing it together out loud. "She knew I was coming. She waited until I stepped through that lobby, then pulled the trigger." Camila didn't answer. She was too busy watching more clips, skimming furious comment threads. Sympathy poured in for Isabella. Rage poured out for Julian. People called him a thief, a liar, a fraud. They cheered Isabella for standing her ground, for setting an example every wronged woman secretly dreamed of copying. Julian sank heavily onto the edge of the bed. It felt like the mattress sagged under the weight of everything he'd never believed she had the nerve to do. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Camila let out another bitter laugh, colder than before. "No kidding. This was supposed to be my honeymoon. You said you had everything handled. You said you were the master of covering details." I am," he shot back, voice tight and raw. "I didn't think she'd outplay you?" Camila cut him off, her tone dripping with disdain. "Because she did, and she did it with the world watching." Julian glared at her, but she didn't flinch. In the span of an hour, the sweet, wide-eyed bride had gone icy and distant. It didn't surprise him. He knew exactly who he'd married. Camila liked power, comfort, luxury, and she made no secret of it. Now that the perks had evaporated, so had her sweetness. A sick twist in his gut reminded him he'd traded a queen for a showpiece. And now the show was over. "I'll fix this," he muttered. "You'd better," she shot back, standing and marching toward the bathroom. "I didn't fly halfway around the world to be a prop in your ex-wife's revenge fantasy." Julian waited until the door latched behind her before pulling out his phone. He called his attorney, straight to voicemail. He called the bank, frozen. He dialed the resort, no answer. Finally, with a hard swallow, he called Isabella. To his shock, she picked up. "Hello, Julian." Her voice was calm, almost indifferent. "I want to talk, in private." "That's exactly what we're doing now. No, in person." A short pause, then flatly, "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. my office." She ended the call before he could reply. The next morning, Julian tugged on his crispest linen shirt and slacks, pretending not to care. Camila didn't come. She'd murmured something about a headache and a spa day, paid in cash, of course. So he left alone. The drive back to Kayakov was short, but every mile felt like a slow spiral downward. At the entrance, the front desk staff greeted him with polite indifference, pointing him toward the manager's office. No VIP treatment, no fawning, just a man with a mess to clean up. They led him to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the glittering sea. Isabella stood behind a sleek glass desk, flipping through a neat stack of folders. She didn't glance up right away. When she did, she merely gestured to the chair opposite her, wordless. "You've made your point," Julian began stiffly. Isabella didn't smile. "This isn't about making a point, not really. Because from where I'm standing, it looked perfectly staged," Julian said, his voice hard. Isabella's tone stayed calm, unfazed. "I warned you not to cross lines during the divorce. But you did anyway. I didn't think you'd come at me like this." "That's the problem, Julian. You didn't think." She stepped around the desk and leaned back against it, arms folded, her presence filling the room without raising her voice. "You used our shared assets to pay for a wedding, a ring, and a luxury vacation with the same woman you cheated with. Did you really think you'd walk away from that untouched?" "She wasn't the reason we split," he shot back defensively. "She was proof we should have split years ago." Isabella didn't flinch. "And here you are, still blaming me for your own choices." She looked maddeningly steady, not sad, not smug, just unshakably composed. It infuriated him more than any outburst ever could. He wished she'd scream, cry, break, but instead, she stayed immovable, a wall he couldn't knock down with charm or threats. "I didn't come here to fight," Julian said finally, dragging a hand through his hair. "I came to fix this. Then admit you were wrong. Sign a statement acknowledging misuse of marital funds. Agree to a new settlement." Isabella's eyes narrowed just a fraction. "One that reflects reality." Julian let out a bitter laugh. "You're trying to drain me dry." "No." Her reply was soft, but left no room for argument. "I'm just reclaiming what's mine." He pushed himself up from the chair, anger brimming. "You planned this from the beginning." "I planned to protect myself," Isabella corrected calmly. "That's what women do when men like you think they're too gentle to fight back." At the door, he paused, voice dropping low. "And the media stunt? That was self-defense too?" She tilted her head, a hint of steel in her eyes. "That was power. The same power you thought I'd never figure out how to use." Julian didn't say another word. He stepped out into the blinding sunlight, squinting like a man seeing daylight after too long underground. His phone vibrated in his pocket. More breaking headlines, more photos, more scandal. His name splashed across every feed alongside words like fraud, betrayal, fall from grace. For the first time, he felt the weight of each headline like a bruise he couldn't hide under an expensive suit. Back at the cramped guest house, Camila was stuffing her clothes into a suitcase without looking up. "You're leaving?" he asked, hollow. She didn't pause. "Your accounts are frozen, the resort won't touch your cards, and I don't do cheap motels." "You're serious?" Camila zipped the suitcase shut with a sharp tug. "You wanted a young, fun wife? Here's the reality. We like comfort. If you can't keep it coming, we're gone." She slid her oversized sunglasses down over her eyes, swung her bag onto her shoulder, and walked out without so much as a glance back. Julian dropped onto the edge of the bed, head buried in his hands. Isabella had always warned him his ego would be his downfall. He just never imagined she'd be the one standing tall when he finally tripped, and that the whole world would be watching. And deep down, something told him this was far from over. The walls of the guest house felt like they were pressing inward, suffocating him. Julian sat hunched on the edge of the narrow bed, elbows digging into his knees, hands locked around the back of his neck. His linen shirt clung damp to his back with sweat that had nothing to do with the sticky Hawaiian heat drifting through the cracked window. Outside, the buzz of cicadas, mixed with an occasional car horn and the faint rumble of a scooter on the main road. But inside, silence reigned. The place smelled faintly of stale upholstery and cheap lemon cleaner. It was supposed to be temporary, a short layover on the way to a honeymoon that would flaunt his new chapter. Now, it felt like banishment. His phone vibrated. He snatched it up, desperate, hoping it was his lawyer, or the bank, or anyone finally calling him back. It wasn't. It was another headline: "Ex-wife outsmarts millionaire husband in explosive resort showdown. Bride vanishes as staff sides with owner." Isabella Whitaker exposes financial fraud on honeymoon day. Julian hurled the phone onto the rumpled bed and shot to his feet, pacing the cramped room in frantic circles. There was barely enough floor to take 2 steps without bumping into the peeling dresser or the squeaking ceiling fan overhead. He struck his palm lightly against the doorframe, glaring at the faded walls, as if they were laughing at him. Julian Whittaker, the man who once commanded boardrooms, manipulated investors, and drank top-shelf whiskey with influencers and senators, now reduced to sweating alone in a budget guest house, abandoned by the trophy wife who had barely left behind a whisper of perfume and broken promises. The knock on the door jolted him. He yanked it open to find a hotel staffer in a tan uniform, an envelope in hand. "Mr. Whittaker?" "Yes," Julian snapped, jaw tight. "This was left for you, sir." The staffer handed it over with a polite nod, turning on his heel before Julian could even think about a tip. He ripped the envelope open so fast he nearly tore first page in half. At the top was a neatly typed letter, his attorney's header. Finally. But the faint surge of relief vanished the second he read the opening lines. Effective immediately, all joint marital assets under investigation have been frozen by court order pending resolution of allegations concerning unauthorized financial withdrawals. He scanned further. Words like embezzlement, fraudulent misappropriation, civil liability blared off the page like neon signs in the dark. None of it made sense. How had Isabella moved this fast? How did she wield this kind of power? Depositions were scheduled. Statements required. Hearings already set in motion. He'd have to fly home, hire a crisis PR team, and try to contain this wildfire before his name was scorched beyond repair in every financial circle that once worshipped him. Like any other disgraced mogul, Julian flipped through the rest of the packet with trembling fingers. Inside were highlighted bank statements, travel receipts, and a line-by-line breakdown of every luxury he'd charged to accounts Isabella could now legally claim. The private jet invoice, the 5-figure engagement ring, the pre-wedding spa splurge for Camila. Even the hefty deposit for the top-floor suite at Kaya Cove. Every cent traced, every expense laid bare. All of it damning. Julian had always assumed no one bothered to dig into those details. That's what lawyers and accountants were for. He'd spent his entire life surrounded by people paid to mop up his mistakes before the public ever smelled them. Now, not one of them was answering his calls. He was alone. He stumbled to the cheap nightstand and yanked open his laptop. Maybe he could still salvage this, a press statement, a heartfelt apology, spin it as a misunderstanding. He could claim the transfers were technicalities of a complicated divorce settlement. Cast himself as the victim of outdated laws, maybe even win a little sympathy. He opened his browser. His work email, locked. His investment accounts, locked. He tried a backup account, denied. Another, denied. Heart pounding, he opened his personal banking app, fingers sweaty on the keys. He entered his password and stared at the screen as it refreshed. No, he rasped aloud, his voice cracking. He hit refresh again, and again. The number never changed. Just like that, the illusion of control he'd built his entire life around dissolved. Isabella hadn't simply humiliated him. She'd dismantled his power, piece by piece, in broad daylight for the entire world to watch. Julian sank onto the edge of the bed, burying his face in his hands. Later that afternoon, suffocating in the stale air, he tried stepping outside for a walk. Maybe a few deep breaths would clear his head. He made it barely a block down the dusty road before 2 tourists, young, sunburned, laughing, pointed at him like he was a zoo animal. "Hey, that's him. Isabella's ex, right?" One of them yelled, raising his phone to film. Julian ignored them, spun on his heel, and almost broke into a jog back to the dingy guest house. Inside, he yanked the curtains shut so hard they nearly tore off the rod. He stood there in the half-dark, chest heaving. He despised this feeling, being prey instead of predator. But worse than being hunted, he hated being irrelevant, forgotten, replaceable. That night, sleep never came. He found a dusty bottle of cheap whiskey in the mini fridge and poured it into a cracked plastic cup. It burned all the way down, but dulled the roaring panic in his chest. He flicked the TV on for distraction, craving background noise. But every channel turned his humiliation into entertainment. One late-night host cracked jokes about how he'd lost both his wife and his mistress in under 24 hours. Another praised Isabella's ruthless brilliance, calling her a modern-day folk hero for wronged women everywhere. Julian sat there in the glow of the screen, watching his reputation get shredded into viral sound bites and GIFs. He wasn't the mogul anymore. He was the cautionary tale, the scandal, the meme. Sometime before sunrise, Still in his wrinkled clothes, he passed out in the stiff armchair, the phone buzzing endlessly in his lap, reminding him with every notification that he had finally lost everything. He refused to look at his phone when he woke. A thin shaft of sunlight cut through the edge of the drawn curtain. The room was silent, save for the dull whir of the tired ceiling fan overhead. Julian stretched, and with that simple motion, felt every ounce of his mistakes pressing down on him again. Heavier now, somehow more real after a few restless hours of fitful sleep. A knock at the door startled him upright. This time he approached slowly, wary. It wasn't a courier. It was a young local journalist, polite but relentless, a press badge clipped to his polo shirt. "Mr. Whitaker, could I get a moment of your time? Just a quick statement?" Julian started to close the door, but the reporter lifted a tablet. On the screen, a live stream placeholder. Isabella Whitaker press conference, live today, Kaya Cove Main Hall. "This story isn't going away, sir," the reporter said gently. "You might want to be prepared." Julian slammed the door in his face. He sank back onto the unmade bed, heart pounding. For a moment he felt the old familiar heat of defiance rise in his chest. If Isabella wanted a public war, then she would get one. She might have locked down his accounts, hijacked his honeymoon, and dragged him through the mud in front of millions. But she hadn't taken everything. He still had his pride. He would twist it into a weapon. He always did. Or so he liked to believe. The resort glowed under the late afternoon sun, every window of Kaya Cove's grand main building catching the golden edge of the horizon like flames dancing behind glass. The manicured lawns had been freshly clipped, the pool deck cleared and polished, the staff lined up at precise intervals, trained to smile but alert for the spectacle about to unfold. The air smelled of orchids and ocean spray, an intoxicating luxury that masked the tension beneath. Just beyond the main entrance, a velvet rope corralled a growing horde of reporters and photographers. Some wore breezy resort shirts and sunglasses. Others, designer jackets and crisp collars. Camera lenses gleamed under the tropical light, each flashbulb a promise of scandal packaged for tomorrow's headlines. Whispers had rippled through the island since dawn. Isabella Whitaker would be speaking to the press. Live. No one knew exactly what she'd say. Some guessed financial retaliation, some whispered legal declarations. Others insisted it would be a discreet but sharp warning to every powerful man's wife, watching from behind gilded gates. What they all agreed on was simple. She had invited them in. Back in the cramped guest house, Julian was fraying at the edges. He stood by the window, phone clutched in a sweaty palm, knuckles white as his other hand curled into a fist. His linen shirt clung damp to his back and collar, sticky with the weight of a tropical heat that felt like punishment. For hours he'd bluffed, making calls, barking threats, claiming he had lawyers ready, counterclaims drafted, a crisis PR team on standby. But none of it was true. None of it was working. This press conference, this final blow had caught him exposed. Isabella wasn't just fighting back behind closed doors. She was dragging their private disaster straight into the spotlight. She was turning their marriage's ugliest truths into national headlines, and every move she made looked deliberate, rehearsed, unstoppable. Julian checked the time. Less than an hour to go. He had to be there. Maybe he could spin it, hijack the moment, reclaim the narrative. He still believed, or wanted to believe, that being Julian Whitaker still meant something. It had to. With that desperate shred of ego clinging to him, he straightened his collar, splashed icy water on his face, and called a cab. When he reached Kaya Cove's main gates, security was doubled. Too tight. A guard in a tailored black suit stepped forward, tablet in hand, scanning a list. "I'm sorry, Mr. Whitaker, you're not cleared to enter this event." "What? I built this place. I own." "You were invited to a private meeting, which you declined. This is a media event. The list is final." Julian's jaw flexed. "Get Isabella now. Miss Whitaker is unavailable." For a heartbeat, Julian just stared at the man, rage coiling inside him. Then he pivoted sharply and stormed back down the drive, pulse hammering. The waiting reporter spotted him through the gate and surged forward like a wave. He barreled past them, ignoring the swarm of mics and shouted questions. One camera caught him spitting curses and shoving a microphone aside. That clip would hit 1 million views before sunset. Inside Kaya Cove's grand hall, the mood was the opposite of the chaos outside. calm, cool, controlled. Isabella stood behind a sleek podium, wearing a tailored cream suit that flattered her sun-warmed skin and dark, elegantly pulled-back hair. She looked commanding without shouting for attention, regal without a hint of excess. Flanking the room's edges were her lawyers, PR strategists, and resort staff, her fortress in plain sight. The moment she stepped up to the microphone, the bright staccato of camera flashes painted the air in pulses of white. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice unwavering. "I hadn't planned to speak publicly today, but recent circumstances have made it necessary, not just for my own sake, but for the countless women who have been silenced, underestimated, or discarded." The room hushed to a reverent stillness. This resort was purchased using the fair share of my divorce settlement that I fought to secure. I chose to reinvest it in something meaningful, something restorative. I never intended for my personal life to affect this resort's operations. She paused just long enough for every word to sink in. But when I discovered that my ex-husband had used joint marital assets, without consent, to bankroll an extravagant honeymoon with the woman he abandoned our marriage for, I knew I couldn't, in good conscience, stay silent. A ripple of gasps and murmurs broke the silence. I took the lawful route. I filed claims, froze accounts, and today I stand here not to shame him, but to make one truth undeniable. Financial manipulation is abuse. It's not just unethical, it's illegal, and I will not stand by while it gets hidden behind wealth and charm. A fresh burst of flashbulbs popped. Reporters scribbled furiously, but Isabella didn't waver. She held up a slim folder for everyone to see. "These are the financial records. Audited, verified. They will be submitted to the proper authorities. What happens next is up to the courts." But to the women watching this, the ones who've been taken advantage of, brushed aside, or underestimated, remember this: silence is not your only option. The room broke into applause. Not polite, but genuine, swelling like a tide. Isabella paused, letting the roar wash over her. "And as for this resort," she continued, a subtle smile curving her lips, "I intend it to be a sanctuary, not a playground for those who treat people as disposable. We're launching programs to help women rebuild financially after divorce, hosting retreats focused on empowerment, and we'll start with a donation fund that matches, down to the last dollar, the cost of my ex-husband's canceled honeymoon." Laughter rippled through the hall, punctuated by another round of applause and the click of 100 camera shutters. Across town, in the back seat of a taxi, Julian watched it all unfold on his phone, live. His face was chalk pale, one hand trembling on his knee as Isabella's calm, unwavering words filled the car's stale air. He could feel her voice in his bones, steady, unstoppable. The driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "You good, man?" Julian didn't answer. He felt something he hadn't felt in a very, very long time: powerlessness. And it burned. Meanwhile, across the island, tucked into a trendy little beachside cafe, Camila lounged back in her seat, a bright cocktail in hand. She watched the same live stream on her phone, her lips curled in a wry smirk. Across from her sat a sun-kissed younger man she'd met earlier that morning at the spa, an influencer with perfect teeth and a camera crew never far behind. As Isabella's speech wrapped, Camila snapped her phone shut and lifted her glass toward her new companion. "Guess I married the wrong millionaire," the man laughed easily. "You married him?" "For now," she purred. Back at Kaya Cove, Isabella stepped away from the podium and slipped through the crowd. Her team fell in behind her like loyal shadows. She didn't pause for more cheers. She didn't need to. She had already won. In the days that followed, the clip of her speech was shared on every screen and feed. She sat for morning show interviews, was praised in op-eds, and held up in think pieces as a symbol of quiet, relentless resilience in a gilded world. Not once did she say Julian's name again. She didn't have to say his name. Everyone else was screaming it for her, and never in the way he would have wanted. He'd been erased from the narrative, rewritten into a punchline, a cautionary tale, a living lesson in humiliation. And the worst part? It was only the beginning. The evening heat made the tiny guest house feel like a suffocating cell, even with the old ceiling fan overhead rattling like it might break free from the cracked plaster. The whole place reeked of stale perfume and failure, every peeling wall echoing his ruined expectations and vanished comfort. Julian slouched on the sagging couch, shirt unbuttoned halfway, fabric sticking damply to his chest. In his hand was a glass of warm gin. Not his drink of choice. He preferred aged bourbon poured slowly over a single perfect block of ice. But luxury didn't live here anymore. He hadn't spoken to another soul since Isabella's press conference. He hadn't needed to. The world was shouting plenty on his behalf. The door swung open with a tired creak, and Camilla stepped inside with a deliberate, calculated strut that made Julian straighten just slightly, his eyes narrowing. She was wearing one of the slinky silk dresses he'd bought her before the wedding, all allure and expensive promise. Her heels tapped sharp against the cracked tile, echoing through the suffocating room. A pair of sunglasses sat perched on her head, even though the sun had long dipped behind the low buildings. Her face was an unreadable mask, somewhere between ice-cold fury and utter detachment. "Where the hell have you been?" Julian rasped, voice gritty from disuse. "Out." She dropped her purse onto the rickety table with a dull thud. "Figured I'd get some air before the rest of your empire crumbles to ash." Julian let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Glad you're still finding time for sarcasm." Camilla pivoted, arms folding tight over her chest. "What did you think I'd say? That I'm proud of you? That I'm thrilled to be rotting in a glorified broom closet while the whole internet laughs at us?" "I didn't ask you to stay," Julian snapped, pushing up to his feet. The stagnant heat between them crackled, charged. "You could have left days ago." She barked out a laugh, sharp and bitter. "Don't act like this wasn't my dream too, Julian. You promised me the world. You told me I was better, different, that I'd never lift a finger, that I'd be worshipped, draped in diamonds, draped across marble pools for everyone else to envy. And you believed that?" He scoffed, sweeping a hand through the thick air. "That's on you." "Don't you dare," she hissed, voice slicing the room clean in half. "You sold me a fantasy. You used me to rewrite your pathetic ending, to parade me around like some shiny upgrade. And you? You used me for my money. At least I was honest about it." Silence crashed down between them, broken only by the distant hum of mopes on the street outside and the dying whir of the ceiling fan struggling overhead. Camilla's shoulders dropped a fraction, her eyes softening just enough to look human again. She sank onto the other end of the couch, their knees almost touching. "So, what now, Julian?" she murmured, voice low. "You gonna fix this? Or are we just sitting here waiting for tomorrow's headlines?" His throat bobbed. He sank down beside her, hands loose between his knees. "I don't know," he admitted, the words tasting like ash. "I didn't think she'd strike like this." Camilla shook her head, a bitter smile ghosting her lips. "You should have. She's not some discarded trophy, Julian. She's smarter than you ever gave her credit for." He let out a long, shaky breath through his nose, teeth grinding softly against the inside of his cheek. "I underestimated her." "No," Camilla shot back, her tone cutting but low. "You didn't just underestimate her. You erased her. You didn't replace her, Julian. You erased her. That's the difference. And now, she's rewriting the story without you in it." He stared at the grimy floor, the empty glass clenched so tight in his fist his knuckles went bone white. "She called the press. She humiliated me." Camilla gave a small, cold shrug. "She exposed you. There's a difference." Julian didn't answer. He felt hollow, as if someone had carved him open and left only the outline of the man he'd once convinced himself he was. Everything was heavier now. His name, his face, the future that used to feel inevitable. And beneath the heavy air, a more terrifying truth gnawed at him. Maybe he'd never been the mastermind. Maybe he'd just been too arrogant to see she'd outgrown him long before this spectacle began. "I can't stay here," Camilla said suddenly, her voice softer, almost regretful. "Not like this. I didn't sign up for broke and bitter." "Then go," Julian mumbled, barely louder than a breath. She turned slowly, eyes narrowing into slits of sharp disgust. "Don't pretend you get to play the martyr here. You're not the victim, Julian. You're just the idiot who got caught." He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in days. The sheen on her lips was fading. The sparkle in her eyes had dulled to something flat, transactional. He'd once convinced himself she was freedom made flesh, a glittering second chance, the prize for enduring the fallout of his first marriage. Now she looked like a mirror reflecting every lie he'd ever told himself. It stung more than he expected, because maybe he didn't hate her for leaving. Maybe he hated her for showing him exactly what he was: replaceable, ordinary, small. "Where will you go?" he asked, his tone dry, resigned. Camila slung her purse over her shoulder. "Somewhere with air conditioning and people who don't pretend everything's fine while their life burns to the ground." She paused at the door, her hand on the chipped frame. "Be careful, Julian. The way you live, it always catches up." And just like that, she was gone. Julian didn't move. He sat in the stale quiet, letting her words echo through the thin walls. There was no reason to call after her, no use begging her to stay. The ugly truth was he didn't even want her anymore. She had been a distraction, just like he'd been a stepping stone for her. Transaction completed, deal done. He rose and stalked to the cramped kitchenette, tipping the last of the gin down the rusted sink drain. He watched the clear liquor swirl away, vanishing as easily as the life he'd once thought untouchable. There had to be a way out of this, a reversal, a new plan. He was Julian Whittaker, the man who'd built an empire from nothing. There had to be another angle to play. But as the sun dipped below the ocean and the first stars flickered above the island, his old certainty kept slipping further away. Every call he made rang unanswered. Every contact he trusted was suddenly unreachable. One message bounced back with a curt auto-reply: "Currently reevaluating professional affiliations. Best of luck." Julian slammed the phone down harder than necessary. He checked his email again. Still locked, still nothing. He tried logging into his business networks, only to find his executive credentials had been suspended, pending internal investigation. His company, the empire he'd spent 15 relentless years crafting, was now quietly backing away, cutting ties faster than he could spin damage control. By midnight, the last blow landed. A fresh headline on the same gossip site that had once drooled over his wedding to Camila. "Whittaker legacy implodes. Former wife exposes luxury lies." It was merciless. It dissected his financial missteps in gleeful detail, listed the frozen accounts, and laid out the entire trifecta: engagement party, wedding, honeymoon. Every glittering moment funded with marital money during an active divorce. It quoted Isabella's speech word for word, sprinkled in paparazzi shots of Camila dragging her luggage from the guest house, and ended with leaked video of Julian shoving a microphone at Kaya Cove's front gates. He scrolled to the bottom and stopped cold. A statement from one of his own board members: "We support accountability at every level. The company will continue to operate with integrity, and we are reviewing all executive conduct to uphold that standard." Julian lowered the phone slowly, feeling something inside him splinter deeper than pride. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was existential. His business, his reputation, his carefully polished identity, all of it coming undone in agonizing slow motion, and there was nothing he could do but watch. He sank back onto the battered couch, staring up at the ceiling where the fan spun in lazy, useless circles, its blades rimmed with dust and old neglect. Outside, thunder rolled low across the distant hills, a tropical storm brewing, but Julian barely registered it. His mind was trapped on a loop, replaying every smug decision, every entitled shrug, every blind assumption that he was untouchable. And now, alone in the stale dark, no money, no allies, no wife, something terrifying finally sank in. He wasn't the one with the power anymore. Isabella was, and he had no idea what she would do next. Julian Whittaker had spent his life idolizing forward motion, never look back, never dwell. Regret to him had always been for men too weak to stomach sacrifice, men without the backbone to cut what held them down. But now, lying flat on a borrowed bed in a cramped guest room that smelled faintly of mildew and cheap soap, eyes fixed on a cracked ceiling while the fan wheezed above him, regret slid through him like a slow poison. Sleep wouldn't come. It hadn't come in days, not since Isabella walked into that lobby with the composure of a queen and the receipts of a tactician. The fan creaked with each futile turn, stirring stale air that did nothing to cool the fever crawling through his skin. The only light was the moon spilling through slatted blinds. Julian turned his head toward the glow, and for the first time, he didn't fight the pull backward. He let the memory drag him under. He heard her laugh first, not the measured, polished laugh that charmed reporters now, but the real one. Careless, musical, the one she used to let slip when they used to stay up late in that cramped old apartment, splitting cheap takeout and dreaming out loud. She'd talk for hours about starting a nonprofit for underprivileged girls. He'd laugh and say he'd fund it after he closed his third big real estate deal. She'd laugh too, but then she'd say she didn't want his money. She just wanted him to believe in something that wasn't about profit margins and glossy branding. He remembered how Isabella used to drown herself in oversized sweaters, curling her feet under her on their second-hand couch. He remembered watching her dance barefoot across their sticky kitchen floor, stirring a pot of pasta, humming off-key with her hair piled into a messy knot. He remembered, fleeting but real, that for a heartbeat he'd thought he was the luckiest man alive. Then came the deals, the zeros, the gravity shift. With each contract signed, each digit added to his net worth, Isabella faded from being his partner to becoming a convenient background prop in the version of life he was rewriting for himself. He stopped listening, and heartbreakingly, she stopped trying to be heard. His downfall hadn't started with Camila. It started the first time he canceled a date night Isabella had spent days planning because some self-important investor invited him to a poker game on a yacht. It deepened when he dismissed her concerns about how he ran the business with that same condescending smirk. "You don't get how these things work, Isabella." It turned truly unforgivable the night she found the message, an innocent-looking text from his assistant, Camila. Innocent in phrasing, but drenched in subtext. Back then he hadn't even pretended. He could still see her by the window of their penthouse, city lights reflecting off glassy eyes. "Just tell me the truth, Julian. I can handle the truth." And he'd looked at her, cold, bored, untouchable, and said, "Does it matter?" That was the last time she cried for him. He remembered how her eyes changed in that instant, from wounded to vacant, as if she'd decided right then that the man she loved no longer existed. The divorce didn't happen overnight, but the emotional exit did. Long before the final signatures, she had walked out in every way that counted. Julian groaned under the weight of those ghosts, rolling onto his side as if he could crush them beneath him. But the memories kept surfacing. The board meetings where he boasted about his wife like she was some philanthropic footnote. The cocktail parties where he introduced Camila as his upgrade, smirking for the benefit of investors who smiled politely but flinched behind polite nods. The smug grin he'd worn signing the final divorce documents, so sure he'd won because he got the penthouse, and she got a settlement he assumed would dry up fast. But now, she owned a resort. She had the public in her corner. She had his downfall stamped permanently into search engines and tabloid archives. Impossible to scrub or spin, she was a figure people called a hero. And he, Julian Whitaker, was nothing more than the man who funded a honeymoon with his mistress using marital assets. That was the headline now. He could not outbid it. He could not buy silence. He pushed himself out of the stiff bed, restless, the air heavy with the staleness of the past refusing to die. He padded across the room and stood by the small window, staring out into the night that refused to swallow him up. The street outside was empty, except for a stray cat slipping through pools of shadow and the occasional sweep of headlights from a passing moped. The silence pressed in on him like a suffocating blanket. He missed the hum of the city, the restless pulse of deals closing, people needing him, his name always in the air. Here, all he had were his thoughts, and they were mercilessly loud. His phone was down to 10% battery, but he powered it on anyway, scrolling through his contacts. So many names, so many so-called allies, all vanished into convenient silence. He paused over Isabella's number more than once, thumb hovering above the call icon, his hand actually shaking. What would he even say? "I'm sorry." "You win." Would she answer, hang up, laugh in his face? He didn't call her. Instead, he opened an old message from Mason, one of his first friends from business school, a man who'd stood next to him at both weddings. 2 days ago, before the headlines exploded, Mason had sent him a short warning. "You sure about this marriage, man? You're playing with fire." Julian hadn't bothered to reply. Not then. Now, he typed slowly, like the words weighed twice as much as they should. "You were right." He hit send. The status changed to delivered. A heartbeat later, read. Nothing more came. Even Mason had nothing left to say. Julian tossed the phone on the rickety nightstand, rubbed both hands down his exhausted face, and murmured into the stale air, I screwed up. It was the first time he'd said it aloud. The next morning, he trudged down to a shabby little cafe near the main road. Hood up, sunglasses on despite the dull overcast sky. He ordered a black coffee, no cream, no sugar, and sank into the farthest corner table, back to the window. He didn't want tourists staring. He didn't want curious locals whispering. He didn't even want to see himself reflected in the glass. A cluster of travelers sat at a table nearby, chattering in Spanish. He only caught bits and pieces, but one name sliced through his fog: Isabella. He glanced up. One of the women was holding up her phone, the press conference video playing on repeat. They were laughing softly, praising her, lifting their mugs in a quiet toast he didn't need to translate. Poor Isabella. Julian looked away quickly, jaw tightening so hard it hurt. She wasn't just a headline now, she was a symbol. And symbols don't fade quietly. His coffee was harsh on his tongue, but maybe that was just the taste of reality. Later that afternoon, he found himself wandering the beach alone. No entourage, no cameras, no wife trailing behind in designer sunglasses. Just him, his bare feet sinking into the burning sand, the crash of the surf a relentless echo in his skull. For once in his life, no one cared where he was going next. Not even him. He watched families laughing, couples strolling hand in hand, tourists posing against the endless ocean backdrop. Around him, life flowed forward, blissfully indifferent to his ruin. Julian lowered himself onto a sun-warmed rock near the water's edge and stared at the rolling surf. Far offshore, a sleek yacht bobbed lazily under the bright sky. For a fleeting heartbeat, he pictured himself on that deck. Glass of champagne in hand, Camila at his side, laughter echoing while Isabella dissolved behind him. Unseen in the rear view of a life he'd rewritten just for himself. But even in fantasy, the illusion cracked. Isabella was there too, calm, steady, watching from the shore. Untouched, unshakable. She had gathered the broken pieces and built something real. And he'd turned gold into dust, wealth into scandal, power into sand, slipping through clenched fists. The tide inched closer, foamy waves licking at his shoes. He didn't move. He let the salt water soak through leather and fabric and skin. Maybe if he let it rise high enough, it would wash off the stale illusions he'd worn like armor. Maybe it would strip him down to something honest for the first time in years. He didn't know what came next, but for once he understood why that terrified him. At Kaya Cove, Isabella Whitaker stood in her corner office. French doors opened wide to the balcony so the ocean breeze could wander freely inside. Morning light sifted through sheer curtains, laying long ribbons of shadow across polished hardwood floors. Far below, the infinity pool shimmered. Laughter drifted from the terrace cafe, where guests lingered over brunch beneath a crisp white canopy. A string quartet played softly near the garden steps, a soundtrack for a place that looked like paradise. And in many ways, it was. But for Isabella, paradise wasn't the postcard view or the glassy pool. It was this, the quiet that follows a perfectly executed checkmate. The calm earned after surviving the storm and choosing not to be broken by it. She moved slowly through the sunlit room, heels clicking across the floor, eyes grazing the neatly stacked folders on her immaculate desk. Each paper, each spreadsheet, each signed line was another knot in the safety net she'd spent months weaving. Her assistant, Marisol, slipped in carrying 2 iced coffees and a tablet tucked under her arm. Isabella accepted the coffee with a faint, grateful smile and waved her to sit. "Updates?" she asked, her tone even, her stride never breaking. Marisol tapped at her screen. "We've received 2 more partnership proposals this morning, one from a women's financial literacy nonprofit, the other from a legal advocacy group. Both want in on the retreat initiative you outlined." Isabella nodded, satisfied. "Good. Schedule calls with both. I want this mission to have real weight, not just polished headlines." Marisol grinned. "That's obvious, Isabella. You've built something solid here. People are paying attention." Isabella didn't answer right away. She drifted to the open doors, standing framed by salt air and a horizon so wide it felt endless. She crossed her arms, looking out past the manicured lawns and stone terraces, out to the restless ocean that, for the first time in a long while, didn't feel like an enemy at her back. Her expression was impossible to read. Thoughtful, certain, and entirely her own. Finally, she spoke, her voice lower, more deliberate. each word measured like a promise to herself more than anyone else. I didn't do this to punish Julian. Not exactly. I did it to prove to myself that I could exist without him, that I could thrive. The media loves the revenge angle, but the truth, the only person I needed to beat was the version of me who thought I couldn't stand alone. Marisol's voice softened. And the woman you are now? She doesn't need to beat anyone. She just needs to build. For a heartbeat, neither said a word. The breeze slipped through the open doors, fluttering a few pages across the desk until Isabella gently pressed her palm over them to keep them from flying away, her gold bracelet catching a quick flicker of sunlight. She turned back toward Marisol. Schedule the first women's retreat for the end of next month. 3 days, full programming. Workshops on asset protection, legal rights, rebuilding after divorce, and find me a keynote speaker, someone who's walked through the fire and come out clean. Marisol was already typing furiously, her fingers skimming over her tablet. I'll start pulling names. Also, reach out to our legal team, Isabella added, her tone crisp but calm. I want to follow up on the case against Julian. The public drama's over, but the real work is making sure the consequences stick. Marisol paused, glancing up. Do you think he'll try to fight it? Isabella exhaled slowly, brushing a dark strand of hair behind her ear. Of course, men like him always do, but fighting needs fuel. And right now he's out of steam, out of friends, out of leverage. He'll swing once or twice more, then disappear into whatever tatters of his reputation he can salvage. She moved across the room again, every step deliberate. On the wall behind her desk hung a single black and white photo, her and Julian, years ago, standing arm in arm in front of their first too-small apartment. Young, hungry, foolish. She'd never kept it for nostalgia's sake, only as a reminder of just how far she'd climbed since then. She studied it for a long, quiet moment, then she lifted it gently from its hook and laid it face down in a drawer. That chapter was done. Downstairs in the cafe, 2 women sat side by side, cappuccinos steaming next to open laptops. One clicked on last night's interview and turned the screen for her friend. Isabella's voice flowed through the little speaker, calm, unyielding. This isn't about vengeance, she said on screen, eyes clear, posture regal. It's about power, reclaiming it, redistributing it, and teaching women how to hold it. She's incredible, one woman whispered, awe softening her words. Can you imagine doing something like that after everything falls apart? Not just doing something, the other said, shaking her head with a grin. Building a whole empire out of the wreckage. Upstairs again, Isabella was deep in discussion with her financial advisor, Evelyn, a sharp-eyed woman with perfectly pinned silver hair. Evelyn tapped her tablet, charts and numbers flickering on the screen. Our Q2 revenue projections have jumped 23% since last week. And the nonprofit arm, Women Reclaiming Wealth, has already secured over $150,000 in donations. Isabella nodded once, decisively. We'll match it, every dollar, directly from the resort's profits. Evelyn smiled, tapping another note into her tablet. Done. Isabella turned back to the window, where the sea stretched out in infinite blue. This was power, not the power to destroy, but to rebuild, to protect, to teach. And this time, it belonged to her alone. Are you sure? Evelyn asked, one eyebrow lifting in that precise way only she could pull off. That's a substantial pledge. I'm sure, Isabella said without flinching. This resort was never meant to be just luxury. It's a symbol, and symbols mean nothing unless they help someone else. She flicked her gaze to the wall-mounted screen, where a muted financial news ticker scrolled steadily. Julian's name flashed for half a second. Whitaker Holdings CEO. Under investigation. Isabella didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply lifted the remote and powered off the TV. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, studying her. You know, I've advised a lot of clients post-divorce, but no one has ever done what you're doing. You're not just surviving this, Isabella. You're rewriting what comes next. Isabella let the words settle like warm embers in the quiet room before answering, calm but certain. That's the whole point. I don't want women to ask, how do I get through this? I want them to ask, what can I build from this? Outside, the sky was dipped in soft orange, the sun lowering behind the ocean in a slow-motion retreat. From the balcony, Isabella watched guests gather at the terrace bar, voices mingling with the lazy notes of a saxophone drifting up from below. She lifted her coffee, breathed in the rich warmth, and felt it settle her bones. Marisol returned, a printed sheet in hand. She paused, gauging Isabella's mood. One more thing. A local paper wants to run a cover story. Not about Julian, about you, your mission, your comeback. They're calling it Queen of the Comeback. Isabella gave a quiet, amused shake of her head. No more revenge headlines. If they want to cover this, they'll do it on my terms. This isn't about a man. It never was. Marisol smiled, scribbling a note. Understood. Isabella lingered by the open doors, watching the last light melt into the horizon. The heat of the day faded, replaced by dusk's gentle balm. Something deep in her chest uncoiled. Not pride, not conquest. Just peace. She had turned pain into a blueprint, humiliation into architecture, silence into a megaphone, and the best part? She was only getting started. The airport pulsed with life, families lining up at security, backpacks and roller bags weaving through bright corridors, the echo of flight announcements ringing overhead. In the middle of it all, Julian Whittaker stood like a ghost someone had forgotten to sweep away. His clothes were wrinkled, slept in for days. His face was hollow, jaw locked so tight a vein throbbed in his neck. He carried no luggage, nothing to pack, nothing left to drag behind him. Just a cracked leather briefcase tucked under one arm like an artifact from another life. He checked the departure board once. He didn't really care where he was going. Anywhere felt better than here. A place where his name had turned to ash, where she had risen from his shadow and taught the world to say her name louder than his. A final boarding call echoed overhead. Julian closed his eyes for half a second, swallowed hard, then forced himself forward, into whatever waited for a man who thought he could rewrite the ending and learn too late who the real author had always been. His duffel bag had been stolen from the guest house 2 nights ago. He hadn't bothered to replace it. All Julian had left was his phone, his passport, and a pitiful scrap of pride, unraveling more by the hour. He was supposed to be on a flight back to New York, back to familiar sidewalks and conference rooms where he could meet with lawyers, polish up his story, maybe even remind a few loyalists who he used to be. At the airline counter, the clerk confirmed his reservation. Paid weeks ago before the walls fell in, was still valid. It was the first flicker of hope he'd had in days. But as he stepped toward the security line, 2 men in crisp navy uniforms blocked his path. "Mr. Julian Whittaker," one asked, firm but courteous. Julian froze. "Yes. We've been instructed to inform you that your departure is temporarily suspended under court order. Your passport has been flagged." He stared at them. "Flagged? Flagged for what?" "We're not authorized to discuss details. You'll need to speak with your legal counsel." They stepped aside and gestured for him to leave the line. He caught the way travelers stared, the way someone lifted a phone to film. Humiliation rose up his neck, hot as acid. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the terminal, footsteps echoing sharp against the polished floor. Outside, the tropical heat slapped him harder than any security guard could. The sun felt cruel, exposing every lie he'd tried to hide behind ironed collars and lawyerly charm. Hands trembling, he called his attorney, straight to voicemail. He tried his backup counsel, a man he hadn't dialed since the first years of his marriage, a man who'd once toasted his CEO title with $400 whiskey. This time, someone picked up. "Whittaker." Julian's voice cracked. "Why the hell was my passport flagged?" A pause, then coldly, "You haven't read the latest court filing?" "No, I've been busy." A weary sigh on the line. "There's an emergency injunction. Isabella's lawyers petitioned to freeze your movement. You're now flagged as a potential financial flight risk. A judge signed off. There's a hearing set to decide if you can travel internationally while the asset investigation is active." "This is insane," Julian snapped. "She's treating me like I'm on the run." "Well," the lawyer said, choosing each word carefully, "considering the funds involved, the timing, and the fact that you tried to leave the country without notifying the court, you're not exactly selling honest citizen right now." "I wasn't running," Julian hissed. "I was trying to go home." A beat. "Then, maybe stop calling New York home, Julian. That penthouse isn't yours anymore." The line went dead before he could scream. By the time he hitched a ride back into town, dusk had swallowed the coastline. The sky sagged low and bruised, thunder mumbling overhead, promising a storm. He dragged himself up the cracked steps of the guest house, the soles of his designer shoes peeling like cheap veneer. The owner, an older woman who hadn't met his eyes in days, waited in the doorway, holding an envelope out to him without a word. "This came for you." Julian took the envelope silently and closed the door behind him. He sank onto the edge of the bed before he even looked at it. The letterhead at the top was unmistakable. The polished crest of his own holding company. Effective immediately, the board of directors has voted to relieve Mr. Julian Whitaker of all executive responsibilities, pending the outcome of ongoing legal proceedings. Interim leadership will assume operations until further notice. No phone call, no last-minute appeal, just words on paper, final, cold, and absolute. The letter slipped from his fingers and drifted to the floor. Outside, the first raindrops splattered against the grimy window. His phone buzzed again on the nightstand, vibrating against the cheap wood. He didn't pick it up. He didn't need to. The flood of alerts all read the same way now. Headlines, hashtags, think pieces. He tapped open one anyway. From tycoon to train wreck, the Julian Whitaker collapse. It laid out every misstep with surgical precision. Anonymous sources, old golf buddies, former boardroom sycophants, spilled details about the reckless spending, the affair, the self-inflicted cracks in his empire. It painted Isabella as elegant, patient, brilliant in her restraint, and him, careless, vain, drunk on his own myth. And the worst part, it wasn't wrong. He tried, half-heartedly, to tell himself it would pass. Scandals always faded. Reputations could be repurchased. He'd done it before. But this didn't feel like a stain to polish out. This felt like rot in the foundation. A ruin that no amount of PR or hush money could fix. The rain thickened, drumming steady against the glass. Julian drifted to the window and leaned his forehead against the cold pane, watching the drops slither down in crooked lines like slow tears. For the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't monetize or bury under a new title. He felt loss, not just of things, but of the truth he'd willfully thrown away. The marriage. The trust. The legacy he'd convinced himself would outlive his worst mistakes. Isabella had watched it all, stone steady and waiting for the moment gravity did the rest. He'd swung the first hammer himself. She'd simply let him do it. He wandered into the bathroom and caught his own reflection in the smeared mirror. He looked older, a man aged 10 years and 10 days, the lines around his mouth deeper. The shine in his eyes burned down to a weary flicker. He splashed water on his face, fingers clinging to the edge of the sink as if it might hold him together. Downstairs, a knock rattled the doorframe. Julian ignored it. It came again, harder this time. Reluctantly, he shuffled over and cracked it open. The local journalist stood there, young and polite but relentless, rain dripping off his collar. In one hand a recorder, already blinking red. "Mr. Whitaker, would you consider an exclusive? A chance to clarify your side?" Julian stared at him, rain-soaked and exhausted. He let out a ragged breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "I don't have a story anymore," he muttered. Then he shut the door, softly, finally, and let the storm have the last word. "Just a mess." The young reporter shifted awkwardly on the doorstep, unsure whether to push for more. But Julian stepped back, letting the door ease shut between them, with quiet, heavy finality. He drifted back to the bed and let himself collapse on top of the rumpled covers, shoes and all. For a long time he didn't move. Thunder rumbled again, closer now. The storm had arrived, and this time it wasn't passing through. It was here to stay. His mind drifted, unbidden, to the beach, to Isabella, to that final night when they'd signed the last divorce papers. He'd laughed then. Laughed at her parting words. "You'll see what you gave up. Not all at once, but piece by piece." And now the pieces were gone. The wealth, the polished name, the mistress, the penthouse, the company. The future he'd once bragged was bulletproof. All that remained was Julian Whitaker, alone, and finally irrevocably, no longer untouchable. The sun dipped low over the endless Pacific, a golden lantern sinking slow behind the horizon, casting soft shadows across the white sand that wrapped Kaya Cove in a quiet embrace. A salty breeze stirred the blooming hibiscus and rustled the tall palms. Sheer white curtains lifted and fell in lazy arcs on the oceanfront terrace. It was a moment that asked for nothing, no applause, no audience, content simply to be. Isabella Whitaker sat exactly where she wanted to be. Barefoot in a wicker chair facing the sea, legs folded beneath her, a light linen shawl draped over her shoulders. In her hands, a ceramic mug of chamomile tea cooled slowly. She wasn't thinking about court filings or news cycles, not about lawyers or profit margins or occupancy reports. She wasn't thinking about him. Not actively, not anymore. He was still there, somewhere on the faded edges of memory, like an old painting tucked in the back corner of an attic. But she didn't bother dusting it off these days. She'd learned the truth. Some ghosts never leave, but you choose whether they occupy your mind rent-free. Below, the waves shushed against the shore, over and over, a heartbeat older than any man's ambition. Somewhere behind her, the resort breathed with a steady hum. Laughter over clinking wine glasses, the soft scrape of sandals on stone, a violin drifting from the courtyard. She had built this, not just the walls and terraces, but the purpose they carried. She had taken the hollowed-out version of herself and filled it back in with something unshakable. She had rooted herself in the ruins he'd left behind and grown taller for it. Her phone buzzed on the low table beside her chair. She glanced at it, unhurried. A voicemail. The caller ID, Julian Whitaker. She didn't open it. She simply looked at the screen for a few quiet seconds, then picked up the phone, felt its small weight in her palm, and set it back down. She could listen. She could hear whatever he thought still needed saying. But why bother? She already knew. The message on her phone would have been a script, regret spun into a plea, an apology dressed up in excuses, or worse, another manipulation, sugar-coated as vulnerability. Isabella knew every layer by heart. The voice that once could melt her resolve now barely stirred her pulse. Yet she sat there a moment longer, the sea breeze lifting loose strands of her hair, letting the moment breathe before she acted. Then she picked up the phone, not to listen, but to delete it. One soft swipe. Gone. Later, as dusk folded into a deeper velvet twilight, Isabella slipped back inside, her shawl trailing like a gentle whisper at her shoulders. The main lobby glowed under warm golden lamps. A handful of guests lingered at the bar, laughing softly, none of them noticing her pass through, her mind drifting but settled. She paused briefly at the concierge desk, thanking her staff for another seamless day, then moved on, her heels tapping a calm rhythm over the marble floor until she reached her office. There, waiting on her desk, lay a simple white envelope, her name handwritten in careful script. Inside, a note from a guest, a woman in her 60s, newly divorced, thanking Isabella for creating a place where she could feel like more than just somebody's ex-wife. Isabella's lips curved into a genuine, quiet smile. This was the real prize, not the headlines or the viral clips, but these soft, private truths. Women rebuilding, piece by piece, on ground that once felt lost. She set the note aside and turned on the small stereo by her window. Soft jazz trickled out, the kind Julian used to scoff at, claiming it went nowhere. She loved it for exactly that reason. It didn't push. It didn't posture. It just was. She settled behind her desk again, flipping through pages of notes for next month's retreat program. A gentle voice broke the calm. "Thought I might find you here." Marisol leaned in the doorway, 2 glasses of sparkling water balanced in her hands. "You're supposed to be off tonight," Isabella said with a playful smirk. "I know," Marisol teased back, "but I had a hunch you'd still be working. Brought reinforcements." They sat together in a comfortable hush, sipping and watching the coastline fade into starlight through the tall window. After a while, Marisol asked quietly, "Do you think he'll bounce back?" Isabella shrugged, setting her empty glass down with a soft clink. "He always does. That's his gift, surviving himself. Maybe this time he'll learn something from it. Maybe not. It doesn't matter anymore." Marisol studied her, then nodded slowly. "You really did let it go, didn't you?" "I had to," Isabella said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Forgiveness wasn't for him, it was for me." Outside, the resort lights flickered on one by one, tracing the paths and courtyards in pools of warm glow, turning palm leaves and water into a gentle dreamscape. Somewhere near the bar, music drifted, laughter rose in bursts. It all pulsed softly, alive, growing, hers. She walked Marisol to the door and paused, looking out one last time at the constellations blinking awake, pinpricks of eternity over her little kingdom by the sea. "Everything changes eventually," Isabella murmured, more to herself than to Marisol. "Even the things we once thought were permanent." Marisol smiled faintly. "Even him." Isabella's smile was wider now, certain and free. Especially him. After Marisol left, Isabella stepped back onto the balcony alone, barefoot under the stretch of open sky. The breeze kissed her arms, tangled through her hair, and carried away the last stale ghost she'd let linger too long. She stood there, quiet and whole, exactly who she chose to be. Julian's final reckoning. The last scene roots him in truth. He's alone, powerless, the storm inside and out. The echo of Isabella's prophetic line, "You'll see what you gave up, not all at once but piece by piece," closes his arc exactly as promised. Isabella's quiet triumph. She's barefoot, peaceful, anchored, not defined by revenge, but by what she built. The buzzing phone is symbolic. He's a ghost now, and she chooses not to open the door. She already knew. The ultimate mic drop, gentle but final. So the story has ended, and if you, my wonderful friend, are still here reading these last words with me, it means something inside you has been stirred awake, just as this tale intended. What did we just witness? Not just betrayal, scandal, or revenge, but a reminder etched into every scene that power is fragile if built on arrogance, and healing is unstoppable when rooted in truth. Isabella did not win because she destroyed Julian. She won because she rebuilt herself from the ashes he thought were hers to keep buried. Life will give us all a Julian to face someday. Maybe it's a failed love, a toxic partner, or our own pride telling us we're untouchable. But the real victory is what we do with the broken pieces. As Rumi said, the wound is the place where the light enters you. This story teaches us that forgiveness is never for them, it's for you. Rebuilding is never about revenge, it's about reclaiming the ground under your own feet. And strength? It's quiet. It does not shout or flaunt. It stands steady while storms rage and says, "You do not own me anymore." So, if you've come this far, take this with you tonight. Whatever you have lost, whatever hurt you still cradle in secret, you are still here. You are still enough. And you can build something breathtaking from it, just like Isabella did. If this story moved you, if you felt seen or stronger for having read it, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Let's keep telling stories that remind us of our quiet, relentless resilience. Thank you for staying with me until the last page. Now go and write your own ending.